We'll call this special session into order. It was a work session, but something came up, and we do have to make it a special session. And I have to apologize, but we're going to ask for a motion to go into executive session. Then we'll be back, and we'll talk about all these exciting things on the agenda today. Can I have a motion to go into executive session?
Mr. Chair, I move we move into executive session.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? So we're in executive session. We'll be back as soon as we can. Discussion on Greater Water Solutions potential water infrastructure. Mike Goodman and John Bell.
So, thank you, Mr. Chair. If I could just take a couple of minutes and introduce Mr. Bell and Greater Water Systems. I received a phone call from a couple of individuals about a week and a half ago, and with this concept of what they're promoting and doing, and it's actually, and I'll let them discuss it more in depth, but one of the things that was appealing to me is the fact that it's reusing gray water in our systems in homes. You know, with the environment where we live today and the way things are going, I've often wondered why home builders don't do more to help conserve water or to even free energy that's out there and available, and why they're not using the material in the construction of the homes. And I understand costs and things of that nature, but nonetheless, why are they not integrating these into their building concept? So when Greater Water Systems was approached me, and then in light of some of the things that's going on in Pinal County with our water issues and things of that nature that has been highlighted nationally by our governor, okay, I felt that it would be good for us to look at this and get an idea of what they're doing and then listen to them as a board, because ultimately if we do anything, it's going to be a board decision anyway. And so with that, I would like to introduce John Bell, the technology that they have. I personally, I don't know, I understand it completely. We have a good staff that can work with them moving forward if it's something that we decide to do at a later date. So with that, Mr. Bell, I understand you're on the phone and you have a presentation for us, correct?
Yes, thank you, Supervisor, and thank you for your time. And I really appreciate the opportunity to speak. So my name is John Bell. I'm one of the co-founders of Greater Water System. And really the WIFA grant application is it's just an opportunity to consider, you know, a water offset platform for builders that would include a simple indoor and outdoor water strategy. It would include gray water, reuse, leak detection, research pumps, and water sense label. Really what I'm an advocate of for builders is say, look, you should be building houses to reduce the most significant amount of water that you can, especially in the Southwest and in states like Arizona. We all know what the water challenges are. And a strategy I sort of advocate for can reduce consumptive use by 50%. So I'll go high level on gray water, a little bit about a strategy I advocate for, and a little bit about the pilot opportunity with some funding available and cost. So next slide would be great.
It's there.
Okay, super. Yeah, I'll go on my slides. So when you look at indoor water consumption, more than 50% of all water consumed indoors happens in bathrooms, and it's really showers and bathrooms, roughly 25 to 30%, toilets roughly 20 to 25%. And when you really break it down, it's kind of crazy to be flushing toilets with perfectly good drinking potable water. So why gray water reuse makes sense from a high level, supply typically exceeds demand, and that's really important. Next slide. And so the general rule of thumb is 2 showers a day is enough gray water to meet the daily demands for a family of 4. Because 2 showers will typically generate about 40 gallons of water, and toilet flushing for a family of 4 will be approximately 25 gallons. The rule of thumb is 5 flushes per day at 1.28 gallons. Next slide. And really, for all solutions in the marketplace today, you have to design a product that fits the builder's needs, consumers' needs, meet code regulations and public health regulations. Those systems are compact in size. They're quick and easy to install. They deliver near potable water. The code in Arizona, which now allows gray water for indoor use, it just passed last session in May, is you need to be certified to a standard called NSF350, and that's recognized in the plumbing code. Next slide. High level from a schematic perspective, construction is obviously a big part of this, and it's really a new construction application just because it's so easy to do on the front. But all you're doing is you're splitting your shower drains, so go to the garage. You're tied to a sanitary stack, which goes back to the sewer for the overflow. Too much shower water is coming in. You run a dedicated line to the toilets, and you need a vent. So really easy to do in new construction. Next slide. And if it's a single-story slab, which is obviously fairly predominant in the Southwest, you're just taking your drains to a sump pump, and then you pump that water back into the technology, and then you process it and reuse it. Next slide. This is the strategy that I advocate for, and I think would be a great opportunity for a grant. And when you look at a home, from the meter out, so you put in leak detection, which is a really novel device, but it measures or stops catastrophic leaks. It finds small leaks and shut your main off automatically. There's a number of suppliers out there. And then when you think about the showering, you want that to go to a gray water system. You reuse that water to toilets, so you're saving 20 to 25% of indoor use and on your effluent going back to sanitary. And then if you think of a hot water tank, whether it's tankless or a vessel style, recirc pumps are essentially hot water on demand, so that gets your hot water to your fixtures faster. And then if you bundle it all under EPA, which is WaterSense label, there's significant savings on the table from a consumptive use. And we're talking more than 50% of water consumption when compared to a code house. And then it's validated. There's lots of water indexes and programs that measure water consumption and validate that. Many builders use HERS index on the energy side. There's a HERS H2O index. That's an anti-standard. There's other water indexes out there, and most of you would be familiar with the WaterSense program. So you can have third-party validation of really what you're trying to do when you measure this. And then next slide, this sums it up. It's a win for everybody. It's for the builders, the municipalities, and the homeowners. And obviously with the assured water supply requirements in the state of Arizona, you can use gray water as an offset to help with those calculations. Municipalities can defer capital infrastructure. They meet water conservation targets. They can alleviate peak flows. They help with sanitary capacity. It helps with their draw from the aquifer. So, everyone wins when you're saving water. And at the end of the day, the homeowners win. And that's the ultimate win for everybody when your key stakeholders like builders, municipalities, and homeowners are participating in this, and they all win. I think I'm one slide ahead of you, so I'm just going to jump to the very last slide. And this is really just showcasing the numbers of what a budget estimate could be for WIFA taking their smallest grant application, which is $250,000. What we've tried to do here is on the assumption side, just some budgetary costs. If you put this strategy together with gray water and the other solutions I talked about, it's going to cost about $11,500 to the builder. And if you divide that by grant application, $250,000, you're going to get about 22 homes, and then you can see what the total water savings would be. You're talking north of 1 million gallons on a basis. And really what we've tried to showcase here is, a number of builders that I know, a number of partners we could bring to the table. WIFA allows to, find ways to be creative. So we do an in-kind, and we try to map it up to showcase what the cost might be for the county. If everyone discounted by 15%, there might be an in-kind contribution of nearly $40,000 from the partners, and the balance that would be remaining from the county, $25,000. Now, we can scale the pilot up to 2 million and have more homes, but I really just wanted to show from a low-level perspective of what the in-kind contributions might be for the county to be considered. So I'll leave it there. Gray water reuse has a massive upside. I believe in advocating sort of an organic, holistic approach for builders. I used to be a builder, and if you bring concept use platform to the table, it has a massive opportunity, a massive win for the stakeholders. So I'll stop there and happy to answer any questions. Thank you for your time.
Are there any questions? Steve?
Mr. Chairman, just real quick, I don't know if there's necessarily a question in here. That's not a lot of homes, 22, and it's very expensive. I guess my real question is, what's the target outcome that you're looking for? Average home uses about 1.4 acre feet a year, something close to that. And so if you save 25%, I think I did the math, it brings it down to 1.12 acre feet per year. This just seems like the expense and the number is just really, really high. I think builders should offer it as an upgrade, as an option on your brand new home. Might consider changing the plumbing code to say all rough-ins would include something similar to this, because the idea of using gray water isn't new. It's been around for a long time. I think the leak detection portion could almost be mandated in the building code, and there's a lot of systems out there that are relatively inexpensive that are very effective to detect that. I think a lot of water could be saved that way. But I just really worry about 22 homes and the amount of money. And I really, if Pinal County was going to go to WIFA and get grant money for a program, would we not ask for an RFP from multiple companies to see who might have the better return on investment for us in a situation like that, and whether or not we could, and the mechanism of us handing out grant money after we receive it, there's got to be some kind of mechanism there, and I'm kind of looking at my attorneys to validate that. I mean, wouldn't we have to be able to justify that gift?
Mr. Chairman, Supervisor Miller, in my best lawyer answer, it depends. Because it depends on how the grant is structured. In certain grants, you must identify who your partners are going to be. In other grants, it's left up to you to then, procure those types of partners and what you're going to do. Like I said, it depends on what the grant is structured as, but there are also ways that the county, for procurement purposes, can do things as a pilot program. It is, and that's probably why you're looking at maybe a more limited scale here. If you're going to do that before you would roll it out to hundreds or thousands of homes or something, to see if it is, if it produces the exact results as projected. So there are some things in our procurement code that allows for various types of pilot programs that give us more flexibility on those situations, because you're not expending a year, X number of years for services. It's a one-time thing for 10 homes, 20 homes, pick a number there, but that's what it works out to be.
I'm just thinking out loud, but what if we got a grant to incentivize people to put leak detectors in every house, even if it's already built? I mean, those can be installed quite easily on existing homes, and maybe we do a program where we'll cover 50% of that install. Just think of how many more homes you could really, and that's an effective and sure thing that it's going to be a positive. How much water it saves will depend on really how many incidents take place at different houses. But I don't know. There's so many things. I mean, I would tell you that you could save millions of gallons of water if we would put instant hots at every fixture. For your vanities, for your kitchen, for your washing machine, where you don't run hot water forever, or just a circulating pump can save water going down the drain if you have hot water right there. And I know I'm a little off of this this topic a little bit, but I'm all open to any and all discussions, but I would say the return on investment and the dollars, I would like to see it a lot broader to more homes. That's my personal opinion. And I really think the building industry should offer those as options to new home buyers. I mean, I think that's it gets baked into the mortgage, but if you really want to be green and you really want to do your part, I think that these types of systems should really come almost builder-driven. That's my opinion.
Mr. Kavanaugh.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Supervisor Miller mentioned return on investment. I did a little spreadsheet trying to do the math on this, and at our current rate of about 0.016 cents per gallon and 1.28 gallons per flush, a family of four spending about $11,364, or the government spending that kind of money on this, the payback, the return on investment would be about 96 years before you saw that. So I'm all for saving water. For that kind of money, we could supplement low-flow shower heads and so on. But this is kind of like Shark Tank, and I think looking for venture capital here inside Pinell County is probably not the right venue.
Sorry, if I could just jump in, the actual savings on the water side would be about 60,000 gallons when you platform everything together. So that was why the discussion's not just about the gray water, because if you can get a WaterSense labeled home from a builder that is building a inefficient home, that's about 40,000 gallons. So when you platform everything together, about 60,000 gallons of water.
Well, it's good to save water, but I just don't think that the government is the correct venue for sort of venture capital.
Mike, I'll let you close it out.
Okay. Well, one of the things is, going back to what Supervisor Miller alluded to, it has to be on a bigger scale, I would agree, in order for us to, number one, to bring the price of these things down, in addition to actually saving more water for our county and providing those type of savings. This is, keep in mind, this is really what they're suggesting is some type of a pilot that they would be doing, and we would be participating in that. That's something that we've been wanting to do when it comes to our water issues here in the first place. Thus the reason for the law change that allowed us to get into helping to treat water on the back end. And so we're able, as a county, to be able to participate with other companies in our affluent waters. And so as I'm looking at this and as I've sat down with them, I mean, we could go bigger on this as far as the amount of dollars and even on a bigger scale. I believe the maximum amount that we're able to do through WIFA is a couple $1 million, which would be, to your point, Supervisor Miller. But because it is with water and the regulations that government puts on the water issues, it is government that is, to Supervisor Kavanaugh's point, we need to be doing our part to help ensure the water supply for the citizens. We're allowing them to build here, and they're under the assumption that there is plenty of water. It's governed by our state agencies on our water, and it's regulated by our state agencies. So government does have a role in all of this. And so I would argue differently there, that we have a responsibility to look at all the options and assist. If we're going to continue to allow things to grow like we are and allow these subdivisions and everything to come in, then we need to be doing our part to help assure that we have water and assure those that currently live here that they're going to have water in the future. And I think this type of a program or these type of things maybe help us do that.
Mr. Chair, I have a quick question. So like in City of Maricopa, all the new homes have a purple line to them. So Global, no offense to you, Mr. Williamson, but Global, but EPCOR is sitting here, but Global does that, through Maricopa. So we could do that in the other subdivisions to say, you need to run purple lines. So here we go. How do we do that from the water treatment plants?
And again, when this was all presented, this was just something so that we could have an honest discussion between us, get it out in the open. There is some dollars available to assist in these type of programs for WIFA. There is a grant application that's due by the end of the month to be able to look at this type of a program. And my understanding is maybe that even opens up with that WIFA application, and we could add or look at the additional, like the purple lines, things of that nature. I don't know that for a fact, but I think this is something worth looking into.
Back to Steve Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just real quick, I kind of believe on incentivizing people to do things. And I think if we incentivized developers to put purple pipe in, gave them a break on something as far as impact fees or something to that effect to further those types of projects, it goes right to the builders. I mean, for the type of landscaping they might use, for again, back to instant hot, things that we can do that will incentivize them. I don't mind being a part of the team, being part of the outcome from our regulatory side of things. I think that's where we're probably the most effective. Handing out dollars is tricky, but if people can do something to save dollars going forward, I think it's a little more incentivized that way. I agree with all these things that are all good ideas. Two things. One, I think we have to have kind of a target. Where do we want each household to go to? And the household thing is a little tricky, and they talk about how we use less water today than we did in 1955, whatever. But the way that you really calculate that is per household type thing, per capita, but it doesn't take in totality of the water providers. Like if you knew exactly how many gallons Arizona Water sold that year and then divide it back, they're kind of measuring what's going in the meter. But when you take in the industrial, you take in the shopping centers, you take in all the stuff that happens, it's a different number. Nothing wrong with that, but it's just the way you calculate it. So anyway, I just think there's some ways. And I'll be real honest with you. You know what some of our challenge is? Water's too cheap in Arizona. And if you raise the price, you'd see people use less of it. And that may be the real strategy that slows the consumption down. That's Steve Miller's opinion.
If nothing else, we're going to move on.
Mr. Chairman, can I just ask for some guidance from staff's perspective? Because there is a deadline on the WIFA grant application. Do you want to see this on an agenda for the 15th so that there can be a vote on whether or not, because we need that approval if we're going to partner on a grant application with WIFA?
No.
I'm seeing a no and a no.
Mr. Chair, if I might just interject here. With that WIFA application, for me personally, I would like to see what are there alternatives that could be used going along with what Supervisor Miller's been talking about. Can we use those dollars to incentivize and do things like the purple lines and things of that nature, or to do those kind of things? And so with that application, I'd like to, and perhaps this product here being, or a similar product, doesn't need to be these, but nonetheless, what kind of dollars, how could we use that WIFA dollars by applying for it? That's what I'd like to see.
We need to meet with WIFA so that we can find out. Oddly enough, I think it was last month they had their meeting right here in this room.
Okay.
I'm good.
All right. Before we go into item number 3, Natasha, it's my intention to flip-flop 5 and 4 because I think for item 5 we have guests that are waiting, and 4 is all internal folks. So we're going to go do those out of order.
Okay, Chairman.
But right now we're going to do item number 3, presentation and discussion with Glenn Williamson of the Canada-Arizona Business Council with our own Economic Development Director, James Smith.
Good morning, Chairman, Supervisors. It's hard to believe it's been a year since Glenn last presented to us, and at that time, the county took action to join the Canada-Arizona Business Council, and the supervisors asked that on an annual basis before we renew that Glenn come back and talk about some of the activities that they've undertaken on behalf of the state and Pinal County as well. So Glenn is here today to provide that update, and without any further ado, I'll let Glenn come on up.
Let's see what we can find out.
Nice. Chairman, Board, thank you very much for having me come here today. I find it ironic that I listened to a water piece in advance, and I think you're right. Global is a good example of what to take a look at and see what goes and what doesn't go. But that's not why I'm here. So from a CABC point of view, first and foremost, thank you for taking a year with us to see what we're doing. During this year, we've had a fair amount of activity. You will be hearing an announcement this month that the state of Arizona will be opening a trade office in Toronto. That has taken us quite some time to get that done. We are also in the process of getting the government of Quebec to open an office in Arizona, which has also taken a lot to do. And we have the government of Canada now looking at a new honorary consul because I've taken a year, I've been away from it, and we've been looking around, and we've now convinced the Canadian government that Arizona is of importance, that we want to do that. So these are things that are keeping an eye on what provinces and what state of this state is interested in Canada, and we're seeing a lot more of that. So within the CABC, we divided this year, and many of you have received the information, we've divided things up into initiatives. We have a series of them. The first one, and the biggest one we started about a year ago, primarily with Stantec, PCL, and my company, EPCOR, and that was Project Hourglass. And that was the movement to try to see if we could get WIFA to pay attention to long-term water augmentation. We have lots of short-term things, like you heard today from this wonderful, innovative company. However, water augmentation for 25 years down the road is still yet to be a little more hammered out. So we forced WIFA into a very interesting position where we've had 2 or 3 meetings, now public ones, where water augmentation submissions for RFI, not an RFP, will be in next week. So we talked about this amongst all of our members, SRP, APS, Freeport-McMoRan, PCL, Stantec, ourselves as EPCOR, and others, and we decided what we're going to do, and we're going to be submitting about a 30-page submittal next week that will be coming from the CABC members, and it will be discussing all of the options in great detail as to what long-term water augmentation looks like, and it's more or less in the range of between $15 and $20 billion. And which choices are ones that may come forward. Counties are getting involved. Counties will be involved in the next phase. This will go on for a year, and we will sort through what these good options are. The intent is within a year to have this hammered down to a decision so that we can move forward and stop selling real estate we don't own and actually have a plan for long-term water that stands very strong in addition to our short and medium-term things. So this was Project Hourglass. That went over very, very well. We're extremely happy with it. We have no skin in the game as to what happens with it, but we are being the catalyst as a nonprofit to nudge everybody forward. So the second one we did was Project Exploration. This one involved about 50% of the mines in Arizona are Canadian, 80% in Sonora are Canadian. We are trying to get these mines to get a voice, to start talking, and to start moving forward. Freeport-McMoRan and South 32 are both big members, and we are nudging them and along with all the other mining companies to step forward and start pointing out that if we're truly going to move fossil fuel to the side, mining is going to become more and more important. And the two states of Arizona and Sonora are the two largest mining states, both in Mexico and in the United States. So that's our project exploration. Project Foreign Direct Investment. This one we tried to hammer down a little bit more. This dovetails with Hourglass. We got together with Dave Cook and his committee at the state level, and since they are responsible for infrastructure, we said, why don't we sit down, take a look at all the major projects that we have in the state of Arizona, and then we'll go up to Canada and we will have meetings, politically meetings with, excuse me, in Ottawa. So you get climatized to that with your committee, and then we will go to Toronto and we will meet with pension plans. So we met with about 8 pension plans that control, those pension plans control about $3 trillion, of which 30% of that to 40% of that comes to the U.S., and therefore large projects in the state of Arizona that are infrastructure related would have an interest. So we were very happy. That went very well. Then we went to Montreal, did exactly the same thing. The committee, the state committee came away understanding that these options, whether they're in Canada or around the world, are things that we need to start looking at in the state of Arizona that are in the $B billion plus range. So Project Foreign Direct Investment, again, these are all on the website. You can see them. That has gone very, very well. Some of that actually has a direct effect in your region, in this county with Maricopa and Casa Grande, with some very big projects that they have approached us for introductions. Project Lift is the next one. This was created because we got very, very concerned post-COVID. We went from 1 million Canadians visiting to 250,000 Canadians visiting, and we're sitting at that number right now. This winter will be a key winter to see what transpires. We sat with most of the major airlines, WestJet, Swoop, Lyft. We discussed it with them, American Airlines. Air Canada was the one that got our attention. Rouge is normally the one that services this area with medium-sized aircraft. We got them to jump to a 787 Dreamliner with reclinable first-class seats, which is new, and this acknowledges the data that we're uncovering with Lisa Urias at the state level, and that is that the million Canadians coming down here, 250,000 of those are business now. And that is a change and a transition that is occurring. So that Project Lift is something that is very big for us. Project Medical Tourism was the next one. We got together with our members over at Dignity and Honor Health and Mayo, and we've had lots and lots of discussions about how to pull in more medical tourism from Canada into this region. We just did a huge meeting, Lisa and I did, down in Tucson and in Yuma, and we've also uncovered that transparent group of Canadians that go into Mexico for tourism and how to get them back up from their dentistry tourism up into this region more. So that's another one. Project North America is obviously tying into USMCA and NAFTA. This also interacts everything we're doing now, pulling Sonora into the picture because of the amount of companies moving there. I was in Hermosillo recently, and I met with the mayor and the governor, Durazo. They are being invited all over the world by everybody, and they are flying there, and the amount of international activity going into Sonora and coming into Sonora is actually quite staggering to watch. So that was a big one. Project Snowbird, again, this gets back to the amount of Canadians coming back this winter. This also gets into us unraveling a changing group of demographics with Canadians, a younger generation of Canadians that don't have the historical north-south travel pattern, and what it will take for the tourism industry to pay attention to that and start looking at it, because that'll affect us in about 6 or 7 years, but we have to focus on it now. The reason we do so well now with business is because 10, 20 years ago, everybody here paid attention to Canadian snowbirds and Canadian tourists, and those turned into businesses. So we're keeping an eye on the snowbird population for 2 reasons, one for the short term, the other for the long term. The last one that we're working on is Project Workforce. We're going to be having our December 1st meeting coming up. We will have the ACA coming in, and Vic is going to give us the presentation on how the state sells workforce to potential very large companies coming here. What we already know is it completely omits the high school graduates and what the opportunities are to bring them forward. So Tom Horn, ironically Canadian, is sending his team over, and they are going to be educating our group on the 90 projects that they purport to use in high schools that follow the European type model, that people come out and can go into working into different jobs. As we learned in one of our last meetings, the mining industry made it very clear to us in their presentations, they're paying $80,000 a year for people to drive trucks. Those people don't need college degrees. Those people can come straight out of high school and make $80,000 a year. This is something that we're going to be focusing on because many of our Canadian companies right now are having an incredibly difficult time having to hire people. And it is not just TSMC, it's across the board. The last one that will come up will be Project Agriculture, and we're in the middle of working on that. And we would look to counties like yours for input as we finish putting that together. So infrastructure, Sonora, growth, water, mining, these are all very, very big things that we're paying attention to, and we're trying to nudge forward, and many of them have an effect on your county as well. So with that, I'll yield and turn it back to you for questions.
Glenn, you represent other states too, right?
No, we do not. Strictly Arizona, period.
At one time, though, but I know you've talked fluently with Texas and whatever. Just where
Correct.
does Arizona rank as importance to Canada as a whole?
So if you're when you have to judge it three different ways, tourism, trade, and foreign direct investment. Tourism, Florida beats us, and California used to beat us, but Arizona is now number 2 after Florida. So Florida gets about 2.4 million Canadians. We get technically about 1 million when this all sorts out. Trade, we're fairly flat, and we stand somewhere in the lower part of the trade activity going back and forth. That is primarily we discount when things cross the southern border and we look at these very large numbers. The reality is most of that is getting absorbed in the other states in the union.
But
So-
Florida gets the Eastern Canadians and we get the Western Canadians, so we
Used
get
to
the
be that
better
way.
of the Canadians, right?
It used to be that way. Now we're getting the largest tourism population in Arizona is coming from Toronto.
Okay.
Isn't that fascinating? And they're not driving, they're flying. That's the history, the transition that's occurring. But the one thing that we get that the other states are actually nervous about is this foreign direct investment. So when we look at foreign direct investment in the state, for the state, Canada is the largest investor by far, even over Taiwan. And when that was going along and everybody was looking at TSMC, Brookfield made a $14 billion investment in Intel at the exact same time. So it almost went pari passu.
And Mesa Gateway Airport has more flights to Canada than even Sky Harbor, doesn't it?
Used to. Flair is now changing that. We are waiting. The new data on Flair is coming out this week, and we're going to see how big that gets. They dropped off during COVID, and now Lynx and Flair and WestJet are renegotiating with Mesa Gateway. The 787 that's going to be going in from Toronto into Phoenix, this is really nerve-wracking because if that front end of that aircraft doesn't fill, then they'll pull that aircraft. And if they pull that aircraft, this is the first major wide-body aircraft we're pulling in other than a European one that pops in once in a while. So this is a real game changer that could come out of COVID if everybody starts to pay attention and focus on Canada, which is why these trade offices are now so important and why Sandra is doing that one and possibly a second one in Montreal. But we're not out of the woods post-COVID. Investments continue at the highest level they've ever continued from Canada here. Mergers, acquisitions continue at the highest level we've ever seen. But we have to always think medium and long term. So if we don't get this next generation tourism sorted out, then that will affect us down the road. In the meantime, the generation of Canadians that is coming down here, 55 and 60 and up, are still coming, and they will be coming for a period of years. And they are the ones with the highest spend. They are the ones that you absolutely want. The ones that we don't know about are the 18 to 25-year-old Canadians. That's a new one because remember that Canada right now has got 50% immigrants over the last 2 generations make up the population of Canada, which is really kind of unique. And that population, in most cases, came from countries in Europe, Africa, and Asia. So their ties to their families are back there, and when trips come up, they may go in those directions, unless we educate them on this region. And that is going to be the new thing that hasn't happened in 40 years. So a 2-generation normal travel pattern is up for grabs in the next 3 or 4 years. Now, Florida, I think, is going to get hit the hardest. But because Arizona is so across-the-board work-oriented and we are growing at such a speed, I think we have a very, very good possibility of increasing the Toronto-Montreal traffic at a great deal, both tourism, snowbirds, and business, while we watch Alberta stabilize. And British Columbia is the wild card right now because of what's going on in Canada. Canada has managed to completely irritate China, and it has now managed to completely irritate India, which makes up a huge population growth up there. In British Columbia, that group is now going to start rethinking where they travel. California would have been the natural for them, but that is now questioning because of what's going on in California, and now Arizona falls into that map.
Okay. I took you off your regular path, so go
No,
back
no,
to
no.
that,
It's a
or-
good question. It's a great question.
Anyone else?
Thank you. And this membership, is it still 10, I think it's 10,000? And
It is.
what does Pinell County receive in terms of fair market value for that 10, just within Pinell County?
Well, we just moved a company called HDD into Casa Grande, and they're probably the world's largest horizontal drilling company. So that's not a bad win right there in and of itself, by itself.
So you were instrumental in the contract to get them to move?
And they're a member of our group.
Anyone else?
It's just good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Anything else you wanted to let us know?
No, I think it's. I think being part of the overall package is very important for this county, as it is for Maricopa, and Pinell and Pima are all involved, and Santa Cruz is now joining because Santa Cruz is very interested in what's going on with their Freeport assets that are down there, and water, and because of our involvement in all of that. So we're keeping a handle on all of those. So from a county point of view, you're in good company.
And you do have quarterly meetings that any of the board members would be invited to go to, as long as we don't abuse the open meeting law?
Absolutely. Would love to have you there.
Okay.
December 1st is the next one.
Yes.
Phoenix Art
Tasha,
Museum.
you said that out, right?
Mr. Chairman, I would ask that we move to executive session for legal advice.
I'm sorry, what?
I would ask that you move to executive session for legal advice.
Right now?
Is your presentation done? Mm-hmm. Yeah, right now.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so was that a motion?
Yes.
Is there a second? Could you inform us on legal advice on what topic?
If we, with this, are complying with law, if we are complying with the gift law. The law requires, there's the two-pronged test, whether we are getting something far in excess of our membership. It spells out fair market value. And then the other part is a legitimate government purpose, which that's pretty broad. But I just
Chris, do you think that's something we could discuss in the open, or do we need to put this on for future agenda, or what's your advice on this?
Excuse me, I'm sorry, I thought I was on. We could go both ways. There is information I could present now, probably, if you give me a minute to pull up the statute. It will be, kind of on the fly. I'd like to be able to get a little more detail as to what the question is. But, essentially, this is falling under economic development, which has some broad parameters on what the board can spend on. After the board determines certain things that will enhance the economic opportunities for the citizens of the county is essentially one of the components.
Okay, I'm looking up and down the dais for suggestions.
To Mr. Keller, if I may, Mr. Chairman. Counselor, we belong to numerous organizations, do we not? I mean, that we pay dues to and what have you. And I don't have a list off the top of my head, but that's kind of common practice.
Yes, it is.
Thank you.
Yep. Several organizations you do.
It'd be no different than East Valley Partnership, Pinal Partnership, et cetera, correct? And as my time with Apache Junction, we remember with GPEC and the Mesa Air Gateway Airport, and you don't always get benefits, but unless you're at the table, then something does come up, then you really have no input. So anyway, for the benefit of those watching, we're kind of having this discussion in the open instead of. Kevin, perhaps you want to agendize this in the future. And
Mr. Chairman, if I might just, excuse me, go ahead, Supervisor Kavanaugh.
We're having a vote today on this, though, right?
No, there's no action.
Oh, I'm sorry, no action.
There's no vote.
Work session. Okay.
the work session, yes.
If I could just elaborate, under the economic development statute, the county has the ability to appropriate general fund dollars, at least up to $1 million under one of the statutes, and another statute's much broader. And contributions may be made to nonprofit corporations and utilized for the purpose determined to be public by the board and so forth. Yeah, so you do have broad discretion for nonprofits, and I believe this is a nonprofit. But also for economic development under another prong, you have additional abilities if you believe that it also tends to increase the economic opportunities for the citizens of the county.
Okay. Well, this was informational only. Kevin, if you want to talk about that, we can put that on a future agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. So as I spoke earlier, we're going to move we're going to do item number 5 now, presentation and discussion with solar utility grade energy production. Brent.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, I'm happy to come before you today and provide a presentation on solar. This has been talked about for quite some time in terms of the board, and I promise that we would come forward to try and answer some of the questions that we've received. First off, I will point out that I am not a solar expert. But I'm the one that drew the short straw in terms of providing the presentation today. But the good news is I brought a couple folks here today that are experts. And if they'd like to raise their hand and be recognized, first we have Dr. Greg Gafford from the U of A, and second we have Dr. Carrie Fleming from the U of A, who's sitting right next to him. They're here to assist with the presentation and then potentially answer questions at the end. This presentation is not for solar. This presentation is not against solar. This is provision of facts as requested by board members over the last couple months to try and answer some of those questions as it relates to solar in Pinal County. Let me see if this works. All right. Everybody's familiar with what solar energy is, and there's some key statistics here in terms of Pinal County as we stand. But as you'll see as we go through the presentation, I have a bunch of slides, so I'm going to go through this very quickly. Just stop me if you have some additional questions. Everybody understands what solar energy is. We provided a definition, but the most important thing about this slide is the first solar farm in Arizona was in Pinal County. You can drive right by this location, and it happened in 1979. It was part of a USDA project on some farm property, and it cost about $4 million when that was put in. It's south of Coolidge. It doesn't exist anymore, but some of the infrastructure's still there. But it's a neat thing to see that the first commercial solar project in Arizona was actually in Pinal County. So we all understand what solar is, but what is solar farming? Solar farming obviously is linking a number of these energy generating panels and or other technologies to create DC current, which is then changed into AC current, which can be part of the distribution network that we also know as the grid. So as you can see in the graphic, solar arrays, an inverter. In a lot of the applications we're receiving nowadays, this is accompanied with what we call a BESS, battery energy storage system, and then goes through a transformer and directly onto the grid and ultimately to the consumer. One of the topics that has been brought up and I've been asked a number of questions about is the concept of agrivoltaics. I believe that Dr. Gafford provided a presentation at Pinal Partnership with respect to this, and he just got back from Mexico, and before he was in Mexico, he was in Africa for a month, and he also has several projects using agrivoltaics around the United States as well. So there's two things that I was hoping to address on this slide. The first one, we've got a short video we're gonna watch, and oftentimes at Planning and Zoning Commission and at the board meetings, folks come in and say, solar panels contaminate the soil. They're made of toxic chemicals. Those leach into the ground. Once there's a solar facility, you can no longer farm that land, or it might cause effects on crops that are adjacent to solar. From our research, from a staff perspective, that simply isn't the case. So Natasha, if we could watch this short video, that would be great.
So, to your knowledge, has there ever been an instance where soil or water was contaminated related to a solar installation?
No. So solar energy does not in any way, shape, or form cause any harm to the soil or to groundwater.
According to the Department of Energy, there's not a single instance of a solar farm ever polluting groundwater. In terms of construction, it's one of the lowest impact methods of doing construction per acre of anything else you could want to do.
There's no cases of a solar farm impacting groundwater. There is very little below grade in a solar farm. There are trenches with conduit and electrical wires, which is not unlike conduit and electrical wires and many types of other construction or installations. The inverters and transformers, there's nothing about them that leaks anything or anything comes off that could possibly impact groundwater, and nothing about the solar modules or solar panels that could impact groundwater.
And I've never seen results that show contamination after like a solar farm. I've seen that people, after a solar farm is there, they take sample and then they find stuff in it. But since they didn't check what was in it before they installed the solar panels, you cannot say it's from the solar panels. And what I've seen, what they found, is not things that are in the solar panels anyway. So it was other contamination. So no, I haven't seen anything that shows that solar panels will be toxic or contribute to toxicity.
There's no study that has shown any kind of toxic or other negative effect on the crops that are being grown.
So it's really one of the cleanest forms of energy, probably the cleanest that you're able to find.
Yeah.
If you'd like to come forward, Dr. Gafford, he's going to come and talk to you a little bit about agrivoltaics and also perhaps reflect on his knowledge of his project.
Anyone can use to improve vision.
Whoops.
So you can say goodbye to your optometrist for good. Did you know that vision impairments have nothing to do with your eyes? The eyes are simply a camera for
Yeah. Question now, Steve.
Yeah.
Brent, we'd like to ask questions at will if we could.
Yep.
And thank you, Mr. Chairman. This may be for both of you too, because this portion piqued my interest. If these things were leaching, how about all these houses that have them on their roofs? Would their front and backyards not be totally contaminated? Where's the class action lawsuits on that?
No, sir. And I wanted, the video is actually longer. It's 2.5 minutes long, but over and over again, it's experts from across the country to say that those rumors that are spread, there's simply no truth in them.
Okay. Let me ask one more question, and I don't know if you have the answer, but let's say there's a big hailstorm and cracks the panels and something does leach out. I mean, what's leaching out that would contaminate?
Dr. Gafford?
So my straw's even shorter. Right. That would also not be leaching out. A lot of the ways the solar panels are even constructed is that it's actually encapsulated in glass. And this is part of what the Department of Energy studies. They, as a federal agency, have to be in charge of regulating whether or not there is any contamination. And so they do put these panels through, the most rigorous test. Up in Golden, Colorado, they test windmills, they test solar panels, and they intentionally break them. That's what their facilities are for. And so they have pulverized these things. They've driven 2x4s through the solar panels. That might happen in a tornado situation to ensure that there is still no leaching in that case. The only place you would see any kind of loss coming out of that might be in a recycling facility where you are intentionally destroying the material and trying to create separation of glass and all of those internal components. But that is, again, something that would be happening at an industrial recycling facility. And
that's got to be highly regulated.
I'm sure that is highly regulated, yes.
Mr. Chair, in your agrivoltaic, I've seen your presentation, heard it, but so, a lot of people say, well, you can't grow things under these. Well, I'm looking at a picture of it. That's your forte. And my answer is you haven't made the machine yet that does that, or get little people, whatever you do, to run around. I mean, however that works, how do you harvest this stuff here, like this in this picture?
Great question. So now that I'm talking, I'll just back up a little bit. So Greg Barron Gafford from the University of Arizona. I'm in the School of Geography, Development, and Environment, and also with Biosphere 2, which is this research facility up in Pinal County. I guess here we'd say down in Pinal County. And so, yes, we initially started off with a simple question of, and some of them came from being in public hearings like this, where people were asking, will solar have a negative effect on agriculture next door? Will solar have a negative impact on the soils that would prohibit us from thinking about agriculture in the future after solar instances? And it was from some of those conversations that we created some of our experiments to see if solar was going to negatively impact crops, hundreds of feet or even miles away, you wouldn't be able to grow crops in and around solar arrays. And so we tried that experiment first. Once we saw that you could create this kind of co-benefit where it's not just that being in the solar array is helpful to the plants, but the plants actually are beneficial back to the solar panels themselves, in that we're a very hot place, right? And the efficiency of solar panels is best when they're a little bit cooler than it is on a hot day. And plants, they lose water just like we do. We lose water through sweat or perspiration. They lose water through something called transpiration, that actually, even though you can't see that water, like you can see the misters at your favorite restaurant in the summer, they are losing water such that they actually cool down the solar panels. Once we got that, we thought, well, let's just put the plants right there by the solar panels, right underneath. And we had the same questions. How much light do plants need? And can they be grown in the shade of solar? In this picture here, you can see there's a large block of shade over some of those crops. But that large block of shade doesn't stay there because the sun is, moving across our sky during the day. And so this picture is actually from our research site in Colorado, where this particular farm, thinking about agriculture and energy transitions, the guy who owns this land, his name is Byron. He's a little bit younger than me, as he likes to point out. And Byron was an alfalfa farmer. And just like we're having challenges here with having access to water, Byron had to petition from different watersheds to get water in his canals. And you put it into a lottery. It's not like here where you're guaranteed an allotment. And so knowing that it's a gamble, it's a lottery, Byron would put into multiple watersheds to get water. So it's not like here where you say, I'm getting CAP or I'm getting the San Raf water. And multiple years, he was not getting enough water to produce his alfalfa. And so he was losing money and was like, that's it. I'm done farming. He had inherited this land from his grandfather. And so he went to the county and asked, I want to do solar now. And they said, well, you're zoned for agriculture. Go back home. And so he tried again, another terrible year with alfalfa, came back again. And this is about the time that we met. And he said, actually, what if I did agriculture plus solar? And so what you can't tell from this picture is that it's about 6 acres in this instance. About an acre and a half is established with pollinator habitat so that he is still attracting the bees, the butterflies, the moths that do a lot of pollination for the neighbor farms that are all around him. And it was an opportunity for us to see, can those plants that are native to Colorado, just like we've done down here, native to Arizona, that are experiencing the full sun, can they grow in any kind of partial shade? Well, the answer is yes. Then, can you grow crops in this shade? And again, the answer has been yes. So we have been doing mostly hand-harvested crops. In this case, they're trying to do more regenerative agriculture because they've lost a lot of soil because they've had multiple years of growing crops without enough water, which meant it ends up fallow halfway through the year. And so they needed to do a lot more to reestablish good soils to support good agriculture. And so during the harvest time, depending on the crop, it is either hand harvested with a crew or sometimes with tractors for mowing for the grazing grass area. All of the land preparation is done with tractors because these posts are high enough off the ground that even if you had the wheels on your implements were, let's say, 4 feet off the ground, these things, when they're stowed horizontal, the wheels can go underneath them and you can still drag for the tilling and everything else that happens there. It's more about intentionally balancing the agriculture and the energy to meet those goals.
So you have to set the post far enough apart then to be able to drive your tractor through there, or have the tractor small enough to fit through there.
Exactly. So at the university, thankfully, because of some of the work we've been able to do in Pinal County down at the Biosphere, we have petitioned to the Department of Energy and the Department of Agriculture, like the two bookends of this discussion about what's the future of our landscapes. And thankfully, it's fortunate, we've landed grants at the same time. And so we'll be able to look at this from what we call a solar-centric zone perspective, where what if you considered agriculture and photovoltaics, this agrivoltaics, from a solar developer perspective. And so that grant was awarded, I'm doing air quotes here because it was awarded in December. We did not get the money until Monday. That's the federal government's slow grind for you. But that is going to be off of Selma Road at a site that is here in Pinal County from a company called AES. It must have been approved by this board at some point in the past. It's the main highway off of I-10, turn left or north onto Selma Road. And there it is ground-mounted solar, so it's very solar-centric. But how can you bring back agriculture to that solar site first? And second, so that you can do it in a way that future solar development could be intentionally mindful of retaining agriculture. And because it is lower to the ground, you either hire children, that's not the route we're going.
After school, yeah.
After school program, that's a whole different topic, actually. But what we're going to do is trial three things. To utilize the space between the rows of solar panels and underneath solar panels, we'll revegetate with native grasses and some of our native pollinator species here. Sheep grazing is something that can be easily done underneath solar. There are sheep grazing communities here in Arizona, and I see it as a completely untapped potential for soil building, agriculture retention here. The second thing we're going to do is, in between these rows of solar, is have rows of agriculture. So not try to utilize the space underneath the solar panels, but the space in between these rows of solar. The space in between those rows of panels is about 13 feet. And so what you can do there is, one, we're going to try some regular commodity crops, things that we grow here in southern Arizona already, central Arizona. And the third one is what is being called, at least by the USDA, as climate-smart crops. Crops that are using less water but still keep agriculture happening here. For that, we're talking about hand-harvested but more slower growing, so you're requiring less time and attention from any kind of farmer in a solar field. So growing chiltepine peppers, a really high-value pepper. Growing agave, can you imagine rows of solar with rows of agave that are bringing really high impacts in terms of revenues, but in like an every 6-year cycle? And that seems like one possibility for even the lightest touch in a solar array.
So Mr. Miller, can I get one more question? So I was going to ask what crops you could grow that are commercial, but that you answered some of that. So start a tequila factory, is that what you're saying?
I think a tequila factory of solar-grown tequila is a fantastic idea. When we mentioned chiltepine, this native pepper, it is a hand-harvested pepper. It is, imagine like if you reuse a spaghetti jar as Tupperware, a spaghetti jar, a sauce jar of chiltepines is about $250. And so we're talking very high value, and just at the mention of it, we've already been approached by 2 spice companies as wanting to sell our agrivoltaics chiltepine. A company out of Wisconsin talking about cross-national interest is looking for us to grow as much prickly pear, if you can believe it, as possible in a regularly harvested manner, because prickly pear is one of these crops. You hear about us discovering medicinal properties from like rainforest trees. Apparently, prickly pear has a very good ability to fight hypoglycemia, and so other pharmaceutical companies are asking us to, again, sustainably produce something that can be regularly harvested.
One thing you brought up was cooling effects from the agriculture, because one of the big complaints is, of course, that there's the heat column that rises off the solar fields. And, one farmer I can think of in particular said, well, by their house, it was cool because they had crops around it, but if you went out away from it, it was 10 degrees warmer. So I imagine the cooling effect would be different with different crops, but what is your general cooling effect thought there?
Great question. So when we first did this cooling effect test, we literally put a temperature sensor on the back of the panel. It's a digital thermometer. The fancy word is a thermocouple. But we wanted to see, how much cooler could you get that solar panel? And when we tried plants like, we wanted to make salsa, honestly. We grew cilantro, peppers, and tomatoes. You could cool down the solar panel by about 17 degrees Fahrenheit. And then we thought, well, let's try this with some native grasses. As you mentioned, Ms. McClure, different plants lose water in different rates. Native grass is here because it doesn't lose too much water, so that cooling effect went down. So it depends, again, on your goals. If your goal is to maximize agriculture production, but it's a really heavy water user, then you're going to have a big cooling effect, but you're using more water. It's all about those trade-offs.
Thank you.
Steve. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, when you need some sheep, give me a call. I know a guy. So, I'm curious though about the picture here. Is that on the western slopes?
This is on the eastern. This is near Boulder, Longmont, Colorado.
Oh, okay.
Area.
I would say
okay. Because I toured the western slopes through the CAP.
Oh, yes.
A lot of fascinating agriculture taking place there, and I saw some solar there as well.
Absolutely.
So,
this project is on that eastern slope. Sorry to interrupt, but the western slope is taking notice, and they're having these same sorts of meetings about what does this mean for how we approach zoning, and questions about, are you agriculture or are you becoming industrial?
No,
how do you save water rights on a property?
Yeah, and Colorado's water program is completely different than anything we've seen here in Arizona. Mm-hmm. If you've negotiated a deal for a water right, you go straight to the judge. There's no Department of Water Resources or anything like that. You go before a judge and negotiate the deal between the two of you right then and there. It's a different system for sure. Okay. Well, thank you for now. That's my questions at this point.
Anybody else? Okay.
All right.
Continue,
Well,
please.
Well, we mentioned to Todd we would send some resources and definitely available to make the quick trip up to talk about this again. It's happening all over the region, and we're just trying to keep a good pulse on it and drive good direction.
And Dr. Gafford will be available for more questions anytime you should so choose here today. All right, moving on from agrivoltaics. What are some of the concerns that we've heard in meetings? And I'm going to address this in two different slides. One of those, the first slide, is kind of the negative things we've heard, because there's two sides of these equations every time there's a solar case, right? The other side is the positive things that exist. One of the big concerns that we constantly hear is solar farms are there for 25, 35 years and use vast extents of developable land. Second, they have to go through a comprehensive plan amendment to green energy, then get rezoned to industrial, and then lastly have site planning, and there's a process associated with that. The reason that this is up here as a negative, and the doctor just spoke to this as well, and we've got some thoughts on how to move forward if the board's interested in pursuing agrivoltaics further, is then you end up with a property after 25 years that has heavy industrial zoning. They remove the solar panels. That property has heavy industrial zoning. Power plant could go there. A slaughterhouse could go there. I mean, there's a large manufacturing facility could go there, adjacent to residential in an area that may have not had residential when that plant went, or the solar facility went in. Limiting economic growth. I know we've heard a lot from both Eloy and Coolidge with respect to that, about concerns about their ability to grow their economic development, and land is already utilized for another use. As we just said, reflection onto adjacent properties, heat island effect, noise. I think we can add dust to that. Dust is one of those that we've heard. And more recently, we've been hearing a lot about wildlife disturbance in terms of restricting wildlife from their traditional paths of migration, et cetera. In terms of the positives, green energy infrastructure is supporting our sustainability. We understand the power needs in Arizona. And if you've seen, 2 weeks ago, there was an article in the Republic about Salt River Project and their plans to vastly expand their green energy portfolio over the next 30 years. And last week, a similar article came out in the Republic regarding APS doing the same thing. Their challenge is, from an environmental perspective, they have to get rid of these coal-fired power plants. And they're becoming less and less economically viable. And with the emergence of the battery energy storage solutions that are out there now, a lot of those peak, non-peak issues that have occurred in the past are being mitigated by battery storage. And lastly, water conservation. Why Pinal County? I think this graphic says it all. When you look at the solar irradiance indexes in the United States, obviously Arizona, and even more prominently Pinal County, is a very viable area for solar. But I'm sure that doesn't surprise anybody. One of the things that we've heard at both Planning and Zoning Commission and at the board is, talk to us a little bit so we can kind of understand what the energy demands are in Pinal County and how solar relates. So that's kind of the intent of these next few slides. We're representing Arizona's population, Pinal County's population, and the percentage that Pinal County makes up in terms of Arizona's population, with the caveat that Pinal County is rapidly growing. Every other month, I send the board out a report. And that report reflects the same thing every single month. Either we're the fastest growing by permit total, we're the second fastest growing of all government entities in Arizona. It's going to be in fairly short order that Pinal County is going to have more population than Pima County. And that's coming. We're going to be number two here shortly with the type of growth that we're seeing, as well as anticipated growth into the future. What does that mean? Yes, sir.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Thank you. Just back to that slide. I'm sorry. Maybe it's the next slide that you're going to. When you're calculating the units of electricity and you're using households, go back to the same kind of comment I made about the water, really in totality, because we have so much industry and stuff. I mean, we should be really looking at the whole picture of how much power is being consumed within our border. And I don't think, at least the way that's labeled, I don't think that really realizes or reflects that.
It's a great question, and I actually have a good answer for you. Okay. It's taken us quite some time to put this presentation together, and there's a number of reasons for that, but a lot of that has to do with the entities that we have to coordinate with to try and provide data that's usable and makes sense to the board today. And what we found is a lot of folks can't or won't share information with us. So the only way that we could make a general representation of energy use for this slide was to base it on some national average numbers and known statistics that we have, including population and housing units. APS, SRP, they won't give you what their customers actually... So if we took Lucid, for example, we want to know how much power Lucid uses, they won't tell us that. That's limited data. So what we have to do is use the numbers that we have and then factor that by known averages so that it makes sense. So when we talk about energy use, we specifically focused on housing units because we don't know what the industrial use is or the commercial use is by sector in Pinal County, if that makes sense.
It does, and if I may, I mean, in decision-making, we would really want to know the totality because I talk with these power companies quite often, and they're very concerned that they're not going to hit their needs. They can project how much power they're going to need in a year, 2 years, 5 years, and they're worried. And there's two factors working there. One, they need to make sure that they stay ahead of the demand, and two, the federal government's mandating this green energy thing. I think everybody's portfolio has to have a certain percentage of it.
By 2030.
Constantly chasing that. Yeah. And especially when they're adding new customers, then they're chasing it even more. So that was one of the things that I wanted to bring up, that why, and they're looking for every square inch that they can put a solar panel on.
But
yes, sir.
But to your point, the capacity of the solar fields that are here now, I think, in one of my discussions with someone, exceeds the need for the day. And so we keep approving more and more solar fields, so we're increasing the capacity, but is it beyond the demand that's going to be necessary for our county or unless you're just dumping it on the grid and selling it open exchange?
And I don't think the conversations I've had with the power companies, they don't break down the power to Pinal County. They're looking at the state of Arizona. Because it goes on the grid, and nobody knows where it offloads. They just put it out there. Some people have to buy it on an open market to get it. There's all kinds of things out there. But if the growth continues, the demand will continue, and they're trying to stay ahead of it. They're trying to prevent brownouts and all those types of things, and I appreciate that. I understand people don't like the looks of solar fields, but I don't think the governments are going to back off on those requirements.
Supervisor Miller, Supervisor McClure, you're actually helping me in the presentation because you're kind of talking me through some of these things I was going to try to explain, but you're making sense of it. So the main question we're trying to answer by walking through these slides is I'm trying to tell a story to get to that answer in terms of what do we produce and what are the needs in Pinal County. But in order to do that, I have to provide a logical progression of how we came up with the numbers, and this is just one step towards that.
So the Butler did it, right?
Right. So the previous two slides were all a lead up to this slide, which is attempting to answer Supervisor McClure's question ultimately. So understanding what we showed on the previous slide, understanding the total housing units, then we look at how much solar energy is needed per housing unit, and that allows us to factor an overall total. So the overall total on the right, and it kind of gives us an idea of, by megawatt, how much would be needed for all the housing in Pinal County per month. Now, based on that, this doesn't include industry or commercial, just because we don't have any way to get that data, but it's our only logical way to try and answer your question, Supervisor McClure, and the answers are coming further on. So when you look at Arizona, this graphic is Arizona in particular, and then we're going to get into Pinal County. When you take a look at where our energy is generated, renewables make up currently a very small percentage overall. I was actually shocked with the size of Palo Verde and the amount of energy it can generate, that it was only 8% of this, and that renewables continues to grow over time. And I think the interest here from the electric companies is to replace that coal portion of this with renewables over time. So when we look at Pinal County, it's vastly different because we have limited generation capacity in Pinal County, but what you see is natural gas and solar. So when you look at it on a percentage basis with the state versus Pinal County, we're only 10% of Arizona is solar, but when you look at Pinal County, 36% of the power that we generate is solar in this county, which shows an impact, especially as we go through these other slides. We have a lot that you guys have already approved that's coming forward. This is just existing. So another question that we constantly get is, show us where the solar is. Explain to us the methodology. Why is a solar plant going here? Why shouldn't a solar plant go there? How many of these have we approved? How many are in the queue? That's what we're attempting to do here. This, I think, is probably the most important slide in the slide deck. And this information was incredibly difficult to get. You wouldn't think that because we drive by these large transmission lines all the time, but nobody wants to provide information on where these things are for, national security reason or what have you. But this is an actual map that shows all of the major power transmission lines in Pinal County in a general sense, as well as all of the major substations. What you'll see as we go through and I show you some of these solar projects by area is they're all located next to a transmission line and close to a substation. So when you look at this map, obviously you're not going to see a lot of solar plants out by Winkleman or Oracle or any south of Stanfield, because there isn't infrastructure there to offload the power. So there's a logic and certainly an economy of scale that's associated with building these plants close to infrastructure. The one thing, we just had a meeting with APS last week that to bring forward is there's a new limiting factor that exists currently today, and that is, although those transmission and those substations may be there, they don't have enough capacity to take on additional power. And especially in the Eloy, Casa Grande, Coolidge area, you're going to see a lot of very large linear facility projects and substations come on board because our growth and our demand is exceeding our capacity at this time. All right, this map's impossible to see, but I have two of these just to fire for effect. I'm going to look at this two different ways just so that you understand it. One of those has to do with the comprehensive plan. The other one has to do with zoning. So as I mentioned before, it's kind of a three-step process to build. First one is the comprehensive plan amendment to green energy. The second is an actual zoning case, and the third is a site plan. So the green that you see on this map, it's not that important to know how big it is or any of those things, but it kind of gives you an idea of the comp plan amendments that you guys have processed as it relates to large solar facilities. Obviously, the small ones you can't see, but it gives you an idea of where they're at and how much of the county you've actually looked at from a comp plan perspective. This is what that list looks like when you put it in tabular form. I'm sure some of these names probably make some sense to you. You just approved Serrano Solar, I think, 2 meetings ago. But as it stands now, in terms of comprehensive plan amendments, you've approved potential for 2,902 megawatts. So as related to that previous number, Supervisor McClure, yes, if these were all built and producing, they would produce far more power than is currently needed to power the housing units in Pinal County. But once again, these haven't gone to the zoning level. These are just approved through the comprehensive plan. If I move on, these are projects that have gone on in through the zoning process. You see that there's less of them. Let's see what that looks like in tabular form. In terms of zoning that you guys have approved, so these are projects that are constructed or we would anticipate being constructed in the near future, it's about 944 megawatts, and it's about 5,000 acres. So, Mr. McClure, again, in terms of projects that have zoning, it exceeds the demand. But not hugely, as we said, in terms of growth and needs from the utilities themselves. These next series of maps I put together in a way that I would understand. When you throw those big maps up on the screen and you try to understand where these things are, it's very difficult to understand the scope, the scale, and the location. So this is kind of an overall look at Pinal County and previously approved in some way, shape, or form, whether it's comp plan, general plan in cities, zoning has been approved. These are likely projects that are going to come forward that are in production now or will be in the near future. This information was very difficult to get. We had to work with all the cities and towns. They had to, in a lot of cases, physically do the GIS work to show us where they were at because they didn't have that information and get it back to us, or the county GIS group worked with those entities to try and translate something to help so that we could show you. This is the overall map. So Santan Valley, Supervisor Goodman, this is where you stand in terms of previously approved solar projects, about 2,900 acres in your area. Once again, it's not all built yet. Box Canyon is coming very quickly, and that's by far the largest project. I believe they have the ribbon cutting event next week. So quite a bit in that small area. Coolidge. Everybody knows Coolidge has had a number of public meetings, and recently when we brought forward the Cielo solar project, came out in opposition to that project. I think it's a really large number. I think it's like 27% of their developable area has had some type of approval for solar projects. So Coolidge is a very active area for solar or solar intent. That's obviously because the major substation of all of southern Pinal County is at Lovemont Corner in the Pinal sub. And then this is where the preponderance of all those transmission lines were on the graphic that I showed you before. So an area where there's viability for solar. This is Coolidge's proposal. Coolidge essentially went through and said, well, we're going to decide areas where we want solar to go. So it went in and designed boundaries around already approved solar sites. And so that's kind of what you're seeing there. But by percentage, there's a whole lot of solar in Coolidge. I think we can all agree that to the eye, there's a lot of solar in Coolidge. Next, we are talking about the Casa Grande area. When we say the Casa Grande area, there's one project that's in Casa Grande. The other project is actually coming before you guys here shortly, which is the Casa Grande Carmel solar project here shortly. So there's two kind of in the Casa Grande area. Florence.
Brent, can I ask
yes, sir.
Quick, back to that Casa Grande one?
Yes, sir.
Is that one on the upper portion of the map, is that Frito-Lay?
Yes, I believe so.
Frito-Lay site. Okay.
I believe so. Yes, sir. There are 3 existing and producing solar farms in Florence. I was at Florence as the manager when all these were built and brought online. Here's Eloy. Eloy is having the same conversations that Coolidge is about how much is enough solar, where should that solar go, and they're going through a process. If you notice the A, B, C, D, and E in that graphic, they're trying to lay out where that solar is going to go in their planning area and in their city boundaries. But as you can tell, there's a heck of a bunch in that area, 10,000 acres in that generalized area that's had some type of approval. This is a copy of their map of how they would like things to happen. Coffee tank. So there's one project out in that rural part of Pinal County for 1,800 acres. Picacho Peak area. There are a couple out in that area. Most recently at the Pinal Air Park, you saw the application and actually approved it for Solana Solar. Solana Solar is a very big project, but only a small portion of Solana Solar is in Pinal County. I think about 60 acres. The vast preponderance of that project, which would be further to the south, is in Pima County. This is, we call it the Oracle area, but it's everything north of Marana and up by Oracle. You've got the Serrano there, and then there's a Chirion energy project. I believe that's on state land. The next question we received is, talk to us about the economics. I thought that this was going to be pretty easy. Turns out it's not. We had to talk to several different people, and to be honest with you, in order to give you the results, Supervisor Miller, it's the same thing as before. There's a whole lot of interpolation that's involved and assumptions that you have to make because every property is different. And the tax code is applied differently in different areas. And so very, very difficult. I want to thank Scott from the County Attorney's Office as well as the Assessor's Office for really helping us provide you some tools. Is this hard and fast? Is this something that I'm willing to lay my life on the line for? No. But I think it gives you a pretty good representation that I'll try to explain. So same thing, Supervisor McClure, we got to just kind of tell a story to try and get to the end result. When you look at a piece of ag property and you're looking at what the revenues to the county would be, we're looking at the projects that are proposed in one extent, and then secondarily, if a project comes on board in a second extent to try and tell this story. We receive no sales tax revenue when a solar project's built. So if you had an existing piece of ag land, it's 100 acres, they build a solar project, there's no sales tax associated with that.
Brent?
Yes, sir.
Do we have a construction sales tax on houses and
Yes.
other developments?
Solar projects are exempted.
But solar is exempted?
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Property tax. So where in the heck does that $8.02 million come from? That is projected annual revenue if all the projects I showed you before were built. That's obviously not what we collect, but if those projects were built, we would anticipate that would be about $8 million. Now, are we sure about that dollar amount? No. We're making general assumptions. We're utilizing one rate, but I wanted to give you an idea of what we would collect if those were there. In terms of utility taxes, we collect none, zero. What about impact fees? We don't collect impact fees on solar, but we do collect permit fees. So when somebody comes in and applies for a permit to build a solar project, the minimum fee for that is $650. Do we collect $650? Yes. Are there additional costs? You bet. When that person comes in, they're getting building permits and they're having inspections. But we don't know what that is, and it varies based on the size of the project and what the project entails. Clearly, it's going to be much higher if it's a BESS than if it's just a solar farm. But we just wanted to give you a general example of kind of what that looks like in a general sense. This is our best guess. One of the supervisors contacted me and said, I just want to know on a piece of property, what would it mean for different types of development on that property? And I said, well, we'll try. So thank you, Scott. Thank you, the assessor's office. What we did is we picked a 100-acre property in Casa Grande and in general compared it to recently built solar projects and other projects in the county to try and understand tax revenue and what that means. If that 100 acre, and when I say in Casa Grande, I don't mean in the city of Casa Grande, I just mean in that vicinity in Pinal County. If that 100 acres were to be turned into a large commercial development, a power center, if you will, in general, the taxable income of that property would be $1.2 million. 100 acres, large power center. If that property was to have a dairy farm built on it, or a feed yard, which there's a number in the Casa Grande area, approximate taxable income on that property, $326,000. If that property, that 100 acres, was existing agricultural land and a solar farm was put on that property, we collect about $51,417. Here's the kicker, and I didn't see this one coming until I got this data back. Government-owned property, state land, city property, county property, is exempt from property or from taxes. That same thing, a solar farm built on a piece of state land for 100 acres would be $2,700. Once again, I didn't put this together. I don't completely understand it, but this is the information we were provided. Yes, sir.
Real quick, Mr. Chairman. So where's the personal property is in this? I mean, because all that equipment will be taxed personal property. And so
Here comes Scott.
It's not what's 100 acres of personal property solar panels?
Correct. And Mr. Chairman, Mr. Supervisor, Supervisor Miller, yes, the personal property taxes, the solar panels themselves are all taxed as centrally valued property through the state. And then the county then gets its allotment depending on what its apportionment is of the total state value. We didn't have, I asked the assessor for that information. They didn't have that data. I am going to get that for you, and I will supply that to you. But yes, there will be additional income from the state allotment of the central value property.
And
Again, go ahead. I didn't.
If I may, I understand that the solar industry actually lobbied and created an accelerated depreciation.
Yeah.
However, they set a floor at 10%. Is what I understand.
The floor is 10%, and it's
where the floor for somebody else is 2.5%.
Right, that is correct. And I think the ceiling is 20% of the depreciated cost. I think that's what solar panels are actually taxed at.
Okay.
So you take the original cost less the depreciation, and then it's 20% of that value.
But I think that number's we need to see that number as well.
Absolutely.
And when you get it,
and we will get that to the board. Absolutely.
Thank you.
So Court Rich is here today, and Court actually asked me that question before the meeting. And I didn't know the answer, so I asked Scott to get the answer. And the other thing that Scott shared with me is if we provide that information, we have to refactor this because all of the other columns will also go up.
Right.
And so by percentage, the numbers may be different, but they're going to be about like this. They're just going to have the personal property side added to it in terms of difference between categories.
This is just property.
This is just property.
Just property.
Yep. Does that make sense? All right, next slide. This is our last slide. Originally, this presentation went through about 10 iterations and legal review and review by the county manager's office and input from the solar industry and input from the universities and input from the power companies. Originally, we had more recommendations and it took more of a position. The intent of today's presentation is to not take a position. It's just to provide some information that provides facts based on your questions. So in terms of a summary, solar farms can be beneficial. They don't contaminate the air and soil. There may be other environmental impacts. They're supported by the comprehensive plan. They do provide economic benefits to the county that we can quantify. In terms of a recommendation on that side, we probably should take a further look at our zoning codes, our ordinances, and our comprehensive plan as it relates to things like solar voltaics or agrivoltaics going forward. But the left side's really what I want to leave you with, which is we recommend from the staff perspective that we actually go out and hire a consultant and do some form of analysis similar to what Eloy is doing to look at areas where it's viable, but also in comparison to economic development opportunities, growth trends, so that we identify some potential corridors for solar that don't impact potential commercial economic development activity centers within Pinal County. And that aligns with what Eloy's doing, Coolidge is doing. We've also reached out to the Arizona State Land Department and BLM. So from the staff's perspective, we just think it would be important to kind of do a study and bring in the BLM and bring in the Arizona State Land Department and cooperatively put something together to take a look at solar and solar viability and where we'd like that to occur. That's all I had, if there's any questions.
Are there any questions?
Just one real quick comment. That's what I was asking for on the comp plan, so you finally got there. Thank you.
Just a comment. You know, we are the sounding boards for the whole county and all of our districts. And I find that most everybody is for solar. They just don't want to see it. They don't want it, especially around Coolidge. Coolidge is fed up with it coming, encroaching on them. So the more remote we can make this, the more off of the roads, the more it's going to be accepted and welcomed. So,
thank you.
Yes. Yeah. And no one else from the public is going to.
It's a work session.
Weigh in, right?
Mr. Chairman, we did have one industry expert who did want to
Yes.
give input, if you would allow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and board members. Court Rich from the Rose Law Group. And most of you know me because I've been here for years doing land use and zoning work and those kind of things. But you may not know that I'm also the vice president of the board of the Arizona Solar Energy Industry Association and have headed up our firm's renewable energy practice for the last 15 years, represent some of the largest solar developers in the world that a lot of them have done projects here in Pinal County, some of which you all have supported. So thank you to your staff and for the opportunity to be here today. I just wanted to make a few comments in response to some of the stuff that was said. And one, thank your staff for, did a tremendous amount of work to bring you facts and really good information. A few things. One, I wanted to focus on, and I'm glad that it was mentioned, and the good question from Supervisor Miller, the tax fiscal information you got there really doesn't tell the heart of the story on the fiscal benefit to the county and the taxing districts, which is the personal property tax. You have, when these projects are built, you're talking about $500 million to $1 billion of equipment being put on these sites. That's not going to scale directly with farming and agriculture. If you add in the personal property for an agricultural site, it's nothing compared to that. And we've done some fiscal analysis. We've had Elliott Pollock and Company, who you all know really well, did a study for the Box Canyon site that the groundbreaking is going to be next week, and a few others here in Pinal County. And just for example, on Box Canyon alone, those business personal property taxes will be $10 million in revenue to the county, $10 million to the school and school districts over that 25-year period. And so that's a big deal, particularly on a project like that that's on state land that never would have been used for anything, at least not in that time frame. So you're taking a nothing and you're getting a big fiscal benefit from that. But just a couple other things along those lines is you're not creating traffic, and you're not creating a need for public services. There's no calls for police service. There's no need to provide water service and go pick up the trash and those kind of things on these sites. They're quiet neighbors that just generate money. I think just to respond to the conversation really quickly about trying to analyze how much power is needed in Pinal County. I don't know that I guess that discussion surprised me because there's no other. You don't look at how much food do the people in Pinal County eat before you cite how much farmland you have. You don't ask how many cars they drive before you open the Lucid factory and make sure they don't build any more cars than the people in Pinal County need. This is the grid is interconnected, and certainly APS serves a large portion of Pinal County. The electrical districts serve a large portion of Pinal County. And they're all interconnected, and they all need energy. And right now, Arizona Public Service is actually turning away large energy users that need large energy, whether it's a lot of it's technology stuff. and saying we can't serve you when you need because we need so much more electricity. So it's certainly the case that we need more power and we need lots more power very quickly. I was going to comment on Eloy because I was fortunate enough to be involved with Eloy and their situation. They've gone through the whole process and they've adopted a new ordinance and worked very closely with the industry. And just on behalf of the industry, if you all move forward, we're happy to sit down and continue to work with you all. One other thing I know that because Dr. Barron-Gafford is here, and I wanted to make sure because he said it last week at Pinal Partnership, and I thought it was really interesting, was this idea of the heat island. Supervisor McClure, you mentioned. I think his research, and he can correct me if I'm wrong, and I hope he does, showed that even without the agrovoltaics, if you just have a solar facility, once you're 100 feet away from it, there's no change in ambient temperature that's caused to any part of the community. In fact, I think within 25 feet or so, there's no measured change. I think he's nodding yes, and I encourage him to tell me if I'm wrong. But that's a myth that we hear in the community often that his research done just down the street shows is not the case. So I just wanted to have that opportunity to say a couple of the things really quickly and appreciate your staff, and I want to be a resource for you all as you move forward. Just a final thought on what Eloy ended up doing is that they set aside that area, certain areas for solar development, but also said, if you want to ask for it somewhere else, come and ask for it somewhere else, and we'll entertain those thoughts for you. It is a challenge, obviously, for an entity like a Board of Supervisors or a City Council to go tell energy experts like where they should locate their energy projects, because that's, it's knowing about what transmission lines have capacity and where the substations are that really guides where these go, not kind of where do you want to see them. And at the end of the day, I want to leave you with, you always get to say yes or no to every project that comes in front of you. And so all of these projects that everybody sees in Pinal County, they've all been voted on by folks like you, local city councils, your predecessors. They don't happen without coming here. And if there's ever one that's in front of you that you don't like, you can say no. You don't need to, for example, consider stopping all development or any of those kind of things. So again, thank you for this opportunity. Happy to be a resource for you all however I can going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we will now go back to item number 4, discussion about guest houses and casitas.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. Pleasure to be in front of you again. Recently, City of Phoenix had a couple of city council meetings to discuss what they call ADUs, or accessory dwelling units, that have ended up in moving forward through the process of making a text amendment to their zoning code. There was a series of stories that were in the Arizona Republic, and I got 2 different calls, and I had one in-person meeting from members of the board wanting to know more about accessory dwelling units. And 2 of those conversations kind of went like this: why don't we allow accessory dwelling units? And of course my response was, we do allow accessory dwelling units, and we permit them all the time. So it's not a new invention. It's not something that's prohibited by our code. But what an opportunity to provide some information. Then ultimately I talked to Mr. Surdy, and Mr. Surdy said, hey, Brent, I think it'd be great if you came in and gave us a bit of a presentation that essentially compares what the county has versus what the City of Phoenix is doing. I followed up by producing a pretty comprehensive memo that was sent to the board, and I think is part of the packet, that gives more specifics than this presentation will. And then I attached a Republic article that came out the week after Phoenix moved forward to initiate their process for the change. And I thought the Republic did a really nice job. They contacted every single city government in Maricopa County and put down their requirements for ADUs. And hopefully everybody's had a chance to look at that. But Pinal County is far more lenient than a lot of entities, and then consistent with other entities, and that even holds true with the Phoenix example. We're more lenient than Phoenix in some ways. We're less lenient than Phoenix in other ways. And I'll finish up the presentation by asking you guys just for some direction on a series of questions, if that's okay with you. What's an ADU? It's a second living unit. It can be a attached cell home. It can be its own separate unit. It can be used by members of the family. It could be used by unrelated folks. It may, as in the case of Phoenix, have its own kitchen. In Pinal County's code, as you'll hear, we currently do not allow kitchens in an ADU. In order to have an ADU, there has to be a primary dwelling. That's a requirement of every section of the zoning code. There has to be a primary use on every property. If it's a commercial use, there has to be something that is the primary use on that commercial property. If it's a residential property, it has to have a primary use. If you want to build a small house on a residential property, you can. It'll just be the primary use, right? And then if you want to build an ADU, then it'll be a factor of the size of that primary unit, because the first unit built is going to be the primary unit. ADU must be smaller than the primary in everybody's code. Why are we discussing it? Well, this is complicated, but you guys go to a number of conferences. You know that housing has been a hot topic. Housing and water have been the two hottest topics in Arizona the last 2 years. Legislature formed the Housing Supply Study Committee last year. Prior to the legislative session, they had a number of hearings doing the same thing. The governor has a blue ribbon committee on water that's meeting. I just met with a number of people from that group yesterday, and the intent is to understand the problems that exist and come up with legislative solutions to solve those problems. That's why we're talking about ADUs. What happened? Hello. A number of bills were dropped last year that related to housing in Arizona. None of them were approved by the legislature, and I know Supervisor Miller gave a number of reports last year that kind of talked about the updates of what was going on. But when you get a deluge of legislation like that pertains to an individual topic, your subject matter experts, Association of Counties, Leagues of Cities and Towns, County Supervisors Association, all those groups start looking at being proactive towards changes that are likely to happen. And that's exactly what has happened. ADUs is one of the bills, and they actually thought that the Kaiser bill would be approved last year to more provide an expectation for accessory dwelling units. And the thought process there was to help with lack of housing in Arizona. Of course, it can have other benefits as well. But some key topics that were discussed as part of that bill that we've taken into consideration in our zoning code update, and obviously Phoenix has taken into consideration, is allowing ADUs in residential areas. They took it a step farther in saying, may not have to require on-street parking. One of the biggest problems with ADUs is congestion in neighborhoods and cars parking on the public streets. It's already a complaint that we get all the time, but you start adding additional units without providing additional parking spaces for those, then you start having problems with getting fire trucks in and out of neighborhoods for emergencies, because there's cars parked on both sides of the street. State, when they looked at it in Kaiser bill, that was one of the hot topics they discussed. The next one was, should there be a relationship between the ADU and the primary residence? Some of the codes that you see in the Republic article, they don't allow you to rent that unit, because there's a coupled on issue here, which is the short-term rentals. They don't allow short-term rentals. And some of the other cities have specific requirements that it has to be a family member. You have to document a medical condition and get a special use permit. There's some sort of relationship there that occurs. That's one of the things they talked about. The other one to get rid of the short-term rental thing was, well, if you are going to lease it, it has to be leased for at least 3 months, because they don't want something for a weekend or a week or what have you. Once again, this wasn't passed, but this is the type of conversations that occurred at the legislature, and it's been confirmed. More of this stuff is coming back this year, and I think Phoenix's decisions are going to be a primary driver from the ADU perspective. We don't call them, in our current ordinance, accessory dwelling units. We call them casitas. Where are casitas allowed? In the residential districts. We don't currently allow cooking facilities in our accessory dwellings. And I'm sure the thought is, why not? Well, there's several reasons, but the key thing to focus on as you look through the document is most entities in Arizona don't, including Phoenix until recently. That'd be a long topic to talk about as in terms of why that isn't allowed. My personal feeling is that that's something that has to change in the new zoning code. If for no other reason than the state passed a law allowing park model homes to be used as accessory dwellings. Park model homes have kitchens in them. That creates a problem for us. If we have to allow park model homes with kitchens and we don't allow kitchens in ADUs. So that's something that we have, and it's been written up and totally makes a lot of sense. One of the, you can either attach it or not attach it. Our key statistic in terms of an ADU is it can't be any larger than 45% of the main building. That's larger than a lot of the communities in Maricopa County. It's smaller than Phoenix. Phoenix moved that to 75% now. But the key with that is we have to be cognizant of setbacks as well as lot coverage. Yes, sir.
Tons of questions.
Yeah, go back to when you were talking about ADUs and the kitchen, not having kitchens in them. Is that a state? Okay, that's what we regulate. The state allows it.
Building code.
The building code, it's a long discussion as to why kitchens aren't allowed. It has to do with utilities. It has to do with building code. It has to do with extra electric meters. There's
and that's why we've adopted it to where we don't allow
and most entities don't, including Phoenix, until this recent update.
Yeah. All right. Now they do.
Now they do. Okay. Now they do. Or as soon as it gets through the process, they've initiated the process, right?
All right.
Since
yes,
Mike's sidetracked us with a question, I've got questions just piling up here like crazy.
Okay.
I'm going to throw them all out there.
Okay.
And then if you get to them during the course of this, one of the reasons I brought this forward is because people do pay attention to Phoenix allowing these, et cetera. Now, we also have, especially in my district, the squatter, illegal camping people that are about to be dispersed from National Forest and BLM. They're going to be probably going to try to go to private property. What if they approach somebody and say, hey, I'll give you $100 a month if you let me pitch a tent in your yard or park my camper or my motorhome RV in your yard? It's not, I think park models are going to be the best we could hope for. That'd be great, but there's going to be worse and uglier and more dangerous. So we got that coming. And if you can do one, why not two? Why not one on each side of your house and one in the backyard? You got three. Pretty soon you got your own little RV resort. Yep. And what about our personnel? All of these roles are going to be then placed on them. Do we even have enough personnel to handle this if we get overwhelmed? We're going to have to hire more people, Leo. So there's about 5 questions that popped up quickly.
Fair questions. Camping wouldn't be allowed. It's prohibited by the code on a residential lot due to camping regulations. RV, not allowed under our current code. And I know that is a hot topic for the zoning code update, and that will be included in the zoning code update. So that's a topic for another day. In terms of multiple ADUs, there's nobody that allows more than one, including Phoenix, and our code doesn't allow more than one either, as to not create that problem. I'm sure that's something we can discuss, and we have already discussed. And I've got Matt. I forgot to introduce Matt. Matt's right behind me here, the snappily dressed gentleman in the blue jacket. That's Matt Klysico. He's with Michael Baker, and he's our consultant on the zoning code. So he's here to kick me if I mess anything up today or to answer any questions the board may have. We've actually talked about in our code update, and it's one of those that's actually under development right now, is the ADU piece. We actually put it on hold this month until this meeting so that we could get some direction from you guys from this meeting. But as we've got the draft set up now for the ADU code, we actually have 2 different size limits. Under a certain square footage of a lot and over a certain square footage of a lot, the rules are a little bit different, if that makes sense. But we haven't solidified that yet, and we're waiting on this meeting. Can I proceed, Mr. Surdy?
Yes.
So 1 per lot, cannot be served by separate utility meters.
Extension cords.
Or extension cords, that's right. Mobile homes and manufactured homes, are not prohibited in Pinal County right now unless it's in a district that allows manufactured homes. So if you were in an MH district and you wanted to have a manufactured home as an accessory dwelling, and assuming that your lot was large enough to allow that, then you could do that. But you can't have a house in Supervisor Goodman's neighborhood and say, I want an accessory dwelling unit, I'm going to put in a double wide. That isn't allowed. It would have to be specifically zoned for mobile homes. Sorry, Mr. Goodman.
You did state park models, but you would assume a park model.
I was going to set that up for Miller whenever he retired.
But a park model would be considered a manufactured home. It wouldn't be allowed where there's stick-built houses.
Park models aren't manufactured homes. Park models are actually RVs, and they're licensed under the state. They wouldn't be allowed in Mr. Goodman's area either, actually, by state law. And you have to have a minimum of 3.5 acres in order to satisfy the requirement to have a park model as an accessory dwelling. Yeah. Hope that helps.
So I could do it with a park model.
I don't think so in your neighborhood.
I got 3.5 acres.
Yeah, but it's not zoned for
okay.
To allow. It's not a mobile home park.
Before I do anything illegal, I just got to make sure, right?
So the side yard setbacks and the front yard setbacks are going to be the same with the zoning district and the same requirements that have to be met by the main building. The rear yard setback can be reduced, but to no less than 10 feet. Another thing which is more lenient than Phoenix. The other one is our height in our ordinance can be up to the height of the main building. Phoenix actually limits it to 15 feet. So we're more lenient in that way as well. This is Phoenix. It's a second independent residence, so it's not connected. We allow either or. It allows you to double the density on the lot without rezoning. We allow the same thing. Limited to 1 ADU, same as us. Must comply with the lot coverage requirements, same as us. Short-term rentals are prohibited in Phoenix. You can do a short-term rental under our ordinance. There's a caveat. You have to rent the main house and the ADU at the same time. You can't do them independent of one another. And once again, that's reflective of a lot of the other ordinances on ADUs from around the Phoenix Metroplex. But they've actually tightened that up in Phoenix. They're probably the most restrictive in the valley now. Must not exceed 75% of the primary dwelling. Ours is 45%. They range out there from 30 typically to 50. Phoenix is the highest. You have that information in your packet. You can have cooking facilities in Phoenix. Maximum height 15 feet. It can project into the rear yard if the side yard and the front yard setbacks are met. This was the big caveat that nobody's talking about, which when I talked to one of their council members that used to be their planning director at a conference that Chris and I were at, I didn't even think about it. The Phoenix thing came out a week before Chris and I were at the conference. Darren was there as well. She happened to be one of the speakers, and I said, oh my God, how much volume do you think you're going to see in Phoenix? What's going to be the impact? And she says, I don't think there's going to be much of an impact at all. I won't say her name because this is on video, right? I don't think there's going to be much of an impact at all. I said, why? She says, most all of our subdivisions have HOAs, and the way that this is written, if the HOAs don't allow it, it can't happen. That's very restrictive in the grand scheme of things. We don't have anything like that in our ordinance. The other thing she said was, these are also going to be very expensive to construct. And Phoenix, believe it or not, actually has pretty small lot sizes as compared to the rest of Arizona. So just kind of interesting backstory there.
If I may, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Yeah, it's going to be a real limited places that it can. But I just want to bring up something here before we get too far down the road, that this is all driven on the cost of housing and the cost of shelter and the need for extended family participation, and just this is, I think the whole thing is going to become more and more intense. Maybe not necessarily in the city of Phoenix, but I think nationwide, because you can't go buy a house today. I mean, that if you're just starting out, and there's going to be there's just going to be a need for it, and it's going to go to hyper pitch here pretty quick.
Yes, sir. So I've got a set of questions, and Chairman, it's up to you on how we kind of get some feedback on this. But the intent with having Matt here and staff here is to kind of get some guidance from you guys as we do our zoning code update, because we're currently working on it. The first question is, do we allow cooking facilities or not? I think I told you there's some legal reasons why I think that we should do it, and you can't vote, but is there a general consensus that we should allow cooking facilities in the ordinance?
I do want to, we need to discuss also, because we're up against time, because we have the veterans ceremony later, so I want to talk to everybody about, and we know that Matt's driven all the way out here, so we want to utilize him while he's here. So some discussion on that without voting?
I'm in favor of it.
I would say, yeah, cooking units would be.
Yeah. If not, you're going to have outlaw cookers,
Yeah.
you know, that are.
Yeah, and
I mean, I just remodel it after you build it.
but I say
Just saying.
I'm for that.
One of the questions or one of the comments that we're hearing from folks as they discuss this is they're very concerned. Say you're not in an HOA. Say you're in my neighborhood that doesn't have an HOA in the Los Montañas area. Somebody by right can come in and put in a casita as it currently stands. There's concern that adjacent property owners are going to get upset. We were not notified of this, or even if this was an opportunity, now they're throwing up this second house on their property. One of the things that other groups are talking about is, should we require some type of use permit so that there's a notification requirement for the adjacent neighbors?
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Wouldn't that be a requirement, though, when you go to do something on your property and you apply for a permit, that it goes out to the neighbors? I mean, I see that all the time.
No, we don't.
Well, we
for
don't
permits, you don't go to the neighbors.
And not, you could do an addition and
right.
not notify anybody.
Right.
Yeah.
If you're
But that
asking
wouldn't
my
be-
opinion, I wouldn't cause an additional special use permit, but it's one of the hot topics among government, so I thought I'd bring it to your attention.
Could you do notification and not a permit?
I don't know how we would do that in a permit process. It would have to be some type
What
of,
I'm saying is you notify. but
oh,
you
a
don't
required notification.
Require a permit.
Yeah, required notification to the
Required notification.
5 neighbors around you, or whoever, whatever it is, 600 feet or something.
Matt, come on up, man.
Great, excellent point, Supervisor Miller. I was just going to offer that as we look at these provisions in other communities, and I know it's not lost on the board, is also balancing that when we notice and the residents don't have an opportunity to comment, is there a benefit to noticing if they don't have any recourse to respond? So that would just be something we might want to evaluate. But certainly we could just require at least a courtesy, let them know that this is what's being developed.
That's what I'm thinking.
Great, thank you for that.
I don't, Mr. Chairman, I don't think that's a good idea to notify them. They would think that there's an opportunity to object, and then we'd start this argument.
That's fair. That's fair.
How much
Parking.
more do you have, Brett?
What'd you say?
How much more do you have?
Just a couple more.
Okay.
Parking. Do you think that if you're going to have an accessory dwelling unit, so for example, I've never been to Mr. McClure's house, but I've seen it on an aerial photo. Mr. McClure has a house in a subdivision. He's got it looks like a double wide garage with a concrete pad in front of that garage. If you had room for an ADU, or your neighbors did, should that pad be widened to add an additional vehicle to keep people parking off the street or not? Phoenix said no, you don't have to. I would point to places like Magic Ranch, Magma Ranch, where you can't even get a fire truck through there now because there's so many people parked on the street. It's a consideration to have. Do you think we should require additional parking or no?
Mr. Chair, I would tell you that it's a triple wide garage and it's triple wide parking, but just saying. In my neighborhood, the HOA restricts the width that you can add onto your driveway. They say, if you want to park another car there, too bad for you. Oh, by the way, you can't park it on the street.
Okay.
So it says,
Nice.
you need to park it. You need to park it in the garage, which is what that was built for. That's not a gymnasium.
I've seen it where it's a percentage of the lot width. Can't be
that
more
too,
than,
yeah.
can't be paved. You know, in other words, there's a limit to the paving of your front yard, basically, to the lot width.
That's my neighborhood is like that, but they say, oh, but you can add to your driveway, except that it can only be 3 to 4 feet of paver on either side, and that's it. You know, so it makes it where it's. And then, oh, by the way, you can't park on the pavers.
Oh, nice.
So
I think the consensus is no.
No, no on additional parking. Do we want to do Phoenix and say if you build an accessory dwelling, it cannot be used as a short-term rental? Or do we want to stick to the county provision, which you could rent it, but you have to rent the house at the same time?
I don't know how you enforce it.
That's the hard part, is how you enforce
I
it.
enforce that.
Code enforcement does based on complaints. That's how it would happen.
Yeah.
I don't want to get into that.
Yes, Mr. Counselor?
If I could just add on to that, because this has been a topic of discussion that we've had in our code meetings, and that enforcement is one thing, but if you limit the length of time, or if you require the length of time that you can rent to 3 months on minimum or something like that, a lot of these places are just trying to get around, you know, I'm renting it out only for a week to make a little bit of money, and it's a party house all of a sudden. And in those situations, you are going to get the neighbors that are going to complain. So that is your monitoring mechanism. If you have something like that, the neighbors will be the ones that are complaining.
But if they're partying, it's a disturbance. You're disturbing the peace. And somebody's going to get, you know, written up on that, aren't they not?
They may. Yeah, if you, depending on who you're calling, yeah, and if it's going on every day.
I'm
But
gonna give you an
those
attorney's
are the
answer.
discussions.
It depends.
Yes, those are the discussions that we've been having, and you know that was one of the other proposals we thought. You know, should we? If you're going to do it, you know, you have to rent it. We don't care who you rent it to, but it has to be for a minimum of X number of weeks or months to get around those. It's part of that short-term rental conundrum that we are getting ourselves into.
And we're facing it at CSA every year.
So,
Mr. Chairman, my recommendation is that we do not retain the rental prohibition.
Not retain what?
The short-term rental prohibition. If someone wants to rent for a week to skydivers, so be it. It's America. They have freedom.
Yeah, and, you know, most of this has come, from my perspective, has been because of residents there's kids and things of that nature that are involved that are needing a place to live, and because of the cost, that it's escalating on the cost of rental units even. Now, I'd probably double my rent to my kids and so that they would go to an apartment, but nonetheless, the fact is that, you know, that's where a lot of this discussion's coming from, is people looking at what's happening in our environment already. And so I think this is a good thing for us, and I'm with Supervisor Kavanaugh on that, is that let's not restrict ourselves on what them on what they can and can't do.
Perfect. Next one is, if somebody has an ADU, do we require that ADU to have separate water and sewer hookups?
No.
That's up to them. They may and they may not. That we don't need
So
to
just
make that a requirement.
leave that out of it.
Yeah.
The other one is development impact fees. So development impact fees are supposed to pay to play for new development and new impact on infrastructure. As it stands now, they wouldn't pay development impact fees for an accessory dwelling. However, they will be adding trips, volume of water, sewer, et cetera, in terms of the pay to play stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, personally, I don't see a large portion of our population using this anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So I say forget the impact fees.
I think it's more of a nightmare to try and track.
Yeah.
And you could rent a room out in your house, and you could argue, they're, you know, they're using more water, they're parking their car,
Sure.
or what have you. So,
Agreed.
Last one. Phoenix has 15 feet. We have heighted the existing structure. How do you feel about ADU height?
2-story ADU.
Well, that's the concern in the other communities is, look at Jeff, he's got a 1-story house, but then he just put in it allows him to go up to 20 feet in his zoning district. Now he's got a 2-story
That would be
accessory
higher.
dwelling.
That would be higher than the house. I'm saying, so my house is
you
2
can't
stories. So.
exceed the main structure.
Height of the main structure, which is what we have currently.
Yeah.
Good. Is everybody good with that? That's all I had.
Okay. Anything else? No. Then we are adjourned.